Trauma Therapist Podcast Plus listeners can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now. Become a Plus listener by going to Apple Podcasts, searching for the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and signing up today. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to have as my guest today, Leann Johnson. Leann, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Guy. It's great to be here. Appreciate you.
So Leann is an industrial organizational psychology practitioner and systems therapist. She has 30 years of experience as an equity and inclusion professional, having worked in nonprofit, higher education, private and public sectors. She's a professional storyteller and an actor in comedic and dramatic improvisational theater in Portland, Oregon. She co-created Black Women, White Women, an evolving experimental work featured in 2022 by the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. Leann, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. Pleasure to be here.
You're in Portland now?
Yes, I'm in Vancouver, Washington, which is across the river from Portland, and I work out of Portland. I do my job and my acting work and storytelling work is out of Portland, Oregon. Yes.
Okay, because I'm in Bend. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, right down, right through the mountain passes there.
Yes, yes.
Where are you from originally?
I am originally from Portland, Oregon.
Oh, cool.
I lived in Portland until I was 10, and then family uprooted and went across the Columbia River to Vancouver, Washington, where I've lived ever since.
Awesome. So really interesting bio. How did this start for you? How did this interest in organizational psychology, comedy, take us there?
Okay, well, it's a roundabout pathway. And when I came out of university, I was actually a communications management major. And then I got involved with social justice work as a volunteer. From there, I sort of fell into, if you will, what we now call DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Kind of fell into that work, and then ended up ultimately in a position with a Institute of Higher Education, and I needed to figure out what the heck is going on with these people here. It was suggested to me that I get a master's degree in psychology, which I did pursue. And in that, once again, fell into this incredible specialization of industrial organizational psychology. So that's a shortcut version of a roundabout way of my life, and I have been grateful ever since to have that academic grounding in the field, which I apply daily to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work.
In what capacity are you working now?
So currently, I have been with a state agency in the state of Oregon. That was redundant, for 13 years as the Director of Equity and Inclusion for the Oregon Health Authority.
Okay. And what does that look like on a day? What do you do specifically?
Right. Well, our focus is really around deep policy change. We are working specifically to eliminate health inequities in the health system in the state of Oregon. And so our work that we do in our division on behalf of the Oregon Health Authority, on behalf of the state of Oregon, and most importantly, on behalf of the people of the state of Oregon, our work is really to transform the delivery system through policy so that we and practice and integrating equity and inclusion practice into the field so that every person in the state of Oregon has their best chance for their best health. And health inequities exist because of 530 plus years of inequities on these lands, colonization, genocide, oppression that has been built into the system. And that's the downside of the story. The upside is that we have been, as people of color, identify as a Black woman, have been so resilient that we have continued to not only survive, but also thrive in these circumstances. So back to your original question, we are working to create policy and practice in the state of Oregon that will help people reach their greatest health. That might be through a healthcare interpreter program that we manage, where healthcare interpreters, we're ensuring that people get their health information in their primary language. Traditional health workers, building a bridge between culture and community and the clinical experience. So functions such as that we have 33, I can give you 30 other examples of some specifics around that. I'm hoping that I've given a bit of a flavor so that answers your question, and happy to dive deeper if you have additional questions.
Yeah, I would like to dive deeper, but before we get there, what about this topic so excites you and gets you?
About equity inclusion specifically, about
yes.
trauma, okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, social justice seems to be in my blood. My grandmother was the president of the NAACP in her small hometown of Keokuk, Iowa. So somewhere this is in my being and my blood. I think also to historically further back the fact that my great grandfather on my mother's side was the first person in her family to be born above the Mason-Dixon line in freedom. Brought over his father was brought over by his father. So brought over to brought north. So there's that piece, and there's a sense of that somebody somewhere or multiple people somewhere in history had to survive the most horrific circumstances in the hull of a ship. Mm-hmm. Somehow they made it. Somehow, as each generation unfolded, we continued not just to survive, but thrive. And so there's that legacy that excites me to carry that on. There is the indication that we, as a nation and as a world, could do so much better around how we treat each other and how we humanize each other. And there are so many examples and so many conditions of dehumanization in our world that we've got to somehow flip not just the narrative, but the actions around that. Mm. I think ultimately, I want to regard and honor the past, make things better for the future, and all of that in the name of, I know we can do better as human beings. I just know we can. Mm. And there's a sense of, well, that seems pretty idealistic. And it's like, well, maybe it is. But if we try, we have a chance. If we don't try, we have no chance to get there. So I err on the side of the honest attempt.
Well, that's super inspiring, and I really appreciate that. And I agree with everything you're saying. I'm a big proponent of, starting small in a sense with the person in front of us.
Yes.
And that makes such a difference. And, I can sit here and think of a lot of inequities, especially around the topic of health, but let's give us some examples. Let's get specific for our listeners here who might be wondering, maybe some people are saying, what inequity? What are you talking about? What inequities? My health insurance is fine.
Right. Well, and if you're asking me to repeat and recite data, I want you to know I will not be able to recite specific numbers. That's not my forte. What I can say is that there are data that indicate both in state by state and nationwide that people of color, people from tribal communities have poorer health outcomes to the point where our lives are shortened. We have data that say, generally speaking, our lives are shorter than that of, let's say, white people because of health inequities. Now, some people, and that's one of just many, many data points. And we always have to remember that these data are about people. There's a person attached to those numbers, people and communities attached to those numbers. So where we land in all of that is that those inequities are not necessarily because of someone's individual actions. Okay. These inequities relate to, again, centuries upon centuries of colonization, genocide, dehumanization of peoples. Mm-hmm. And so to say that this is about, well, you better eat an apple instead of a Snickers candy bar. Well, certainly we have our own agency around our health. Yes. Mm-hmm. And there's a broader context that is impacting health and bringing greater harm to certain populations of people because of this legacy of racism and oppression. And so we take this work way upstream to address the historical and contemporary injustices that are still in existence in our nation on these lands with that historical legacy of 530 plus years of colonization.
So how do you tackle that? How do you address that? What does that mean? You take it upstream.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, basically, I think of the work of Dr. David Williams and Dr. Kamara Jones, in particular, Harvard researchers, and their work indicates that, like, for example, even when you control for things like income, education, which are considered what are called social determinants of health, criminal justice system, transportation, even when you control in those areas, when you add race to the equation, the inequities still exist. So this is not a poverty issue. It is not an ignorance issue, as some people want to express it that way. It's none of those things. It is the fact that in this day and age, even if a person has access to health insurance or access to a clinician, they may still experience bias, bigotry, racism in the clinical experience. So it's not just about access. Insurance and access are part of the equation, but it's about what then happens after that. And it's also about the toxic stress that impacts our health on a daily basis and the connection between mind and body. And for example, there is another data point that says people who give birth, Black people who give birth, and this is poignant, and I'm going to give an activation warning. Black people who give birth are more likely to lose that infant in the first year than white people who give birth. Once again, when you control for all of the other factors, that still occurs. Mm-hmm. That still occurs. So babies of color are dying at a higher rate, not based upon the actions of the mother, but based upon predominantly the conditions of society and perhaps even the actions of the clinician. I will give you an example if you'd like to hear a personal example of how this plays out. Would that be helpful?
Of course, yeah.
Yes. Yes. So 32 years ago, and I will say this was 32 years ago, and this still happens today because there are stories that will reinforce this. Stories, Serena Williams, Allison Felix, two world-class athletes who had very poor birthing experiences. So I was in extreme pain because childbirth is extremely painful. And I had the feeling that I was in what is called active labor. I felt like the need to push. And I was told over and over again by the healthcare professionals in the room, oh, honey, if you think this is hard, just wait when you get to active labor. That was their attitude towards me. They did not listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was one clinician that came in, took one look at me and said, did a check and said, you're in active labor. I said, yes. I've never given birth before, but this seems like we're at critical time here. And so there was that. And then after I gave birth, the color drained from my face. I was passing out. I was not feeling right. I was feeling nauseous. I was feeling like my core was just going to just explode through this nauseous feeling. And I kept saying, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. Once again, the general feeling was, oh, honey, you just gave birth. It's a hard thing. Again, one clinician out of a room full of clinicians walked in, took one look at me and knew something was wrong and went through an intervention, which I will not give the gory details around. And I had a postpartum hemorrhage. That went unrecognized for, I cannot tell you how long, but for quite some time, to the point where the intervention was pretty graphic and radical. I'll just say that. And so that story and those stories that get repeated that still occur are stories around our dehumanization.
Now, first of all, thank you for sharing that personal story.
Yeah.
And I excuse my ignorance here, but are we talking about white clinicians solely?
Not necessarily.
Or are we talking about a system?
We're talking about a system
that primarily moves and operates from a patriarchal us against them, top-down way.
I think that's a great way to put it. And it is, if you as an individual, as a clinician, went through, or as any individual in this country, quite frankly, that was born here and here during their formative years, we are bombarded with messaging in our classrooms, in our workplaces, related to that either explicitly or implicitly dehumanize. And so the entire system has been built around, I will just say it, white supremacy. And it is absolutely possible that anyone who is in that system, regardless of their ethnic background, could also get conditioned in that way.
Right. Leann, this is, I mean, it's really hard to hear. And, there's no way I can put myself in the position of someone who's gone through this, but how the hell do you tackle this problem?
Yeah.
It seems gargantuan.
Mm-hmm. It is gargantuan. I believe earlier you mentioned, one person at a time, the person in front of you, the situation in front of you, that we can only influence that which is immediately around us. We each have different ranges of our sphere of influence. So the more people working toward, and I will just say it, the elimination of racism and oppression, that's really the bottom line. More people that are working toward that, we have a broader sphere of influence. Those start to intersect, and then we're working in concert with each other to make a difference. So it is a long-term issue, problem that requires absolutely long-term solutions and changes. And we must remember, especially when we talk about systems, systems are people and people are systems. So there's structural racism and oppression built into the system, but who built those systems and who is continuing to perpetuate those systems? People. So it's a twofold and everything in between attack on racism and an attack on oppression. We need to attack it and change it, and do it within every realm that we can, and remembering that it absolutely begins with our own personal reflection. I reflect every day related to the privilege I have and related to the oppression that has come my way as well. And I cannot separate myself from a system that has conditioned me as well. There are times when I think, my goodness, where did that come from? Why was I thinking that? And it's that conditioning of the system. And so I, as an individual, need to be honest with myself. Each of us need to be honest with ourselves and begin to reflect on attitudes and behaviors and change behaviors. And that's all we can really do. We cannot, let me tell you this. For example, in a workplace, we can only address behaviors. We can't necessarily change a person's values or attitudes, but at the very least, we can have, for lack of a better word, accountability and compliance systems that help check behaviors. I would hope that people will take it further than that. And I can't control that. I can't control that outcome. And having that realization that I cannot control that outcome has been absolutely instrumental in me working to maintain within this as best I can my own mental health, quite frankly, and trauma.
If we look at the state of things in terms of an arc over history, is there improvement? Has there been improvement?
That's a good question, and it would depend on what frame one is coming from in that. When we regard our laws, civil rights law, gender affirming care that we just passed in the state of Oregon, the federal law that says people when we talk about national origin, and the Affordable Care Act, that people must receive their health information in their primary language if the program is receiving federal funds. So laws have definitely moved progressively to support the humanity of people. We can say that we have come a long, long way. And where we struggle in many ways, and one tension point is the fear of having conversations around this, so people do have the opportunity to change. And so it's a cliche, and often in this work we do say, a few moves forward, 3 moves forward, 1 move back, 2 moves forward, 4 moves back. We do, it's ebb and flow. And we are seeing right now, I think, in our country, a resurgence of some lack of shame around having racist attitudes and racist behaviors, and that to me is a drawback. Those are moves backward as far as I'm concerned.
As we kind of get ready to close out here, you talked a little bit about kind of maintaining a certain awareness individually. What would you say to the listeners, many of whom are therapists and coaches and survivors of sorts? What would you say to them in terms of things that they can do actively
Mhm.
to begin to be more aware of their own
Mhm.
attitudes and so forth?
Hmm. Well, I there are many things that people can do. I think what's really important is what is your, reflect on what is your life experience. Um, have you had to uh, have you had to and I don't want I've used sort of violent language before. I'll use it again. Have you had to fight for your own humanity? Are there people in your life where they have had to? You're reflecting upon what is your own personal experience and what is your exposure to people that are not like you. What is your level of comfort
Mm-hmm.
to being around people that are, quote, not like you? And reading is critical. Exposing yourself to new information. First and foremost, at the foundation of that is to get out of denial that racism and oppression do exist. We must get out of denial. Another one of my favorite researchers, Dr. Joy DeGruy, um, talks about the pathology of the American condition. The pathology is the denial that we come from a legacy of oppression, of genocide, of enslavement.
Mm-hmm.
We are not removed at all anymore from that as far as I am experiencing. And so understanding the history and the reality. And we have, I think, at times a crisis in critical thinking and a crisis in empathy. And so those are some tools we need to sharpen up a bit, as far as I'm concerned. I would really encourage, first and foremost, that reflection, though,
Mm,
and then
appreciate that.
working to do something different and working to, test your assumptions. I'm always shocked at myself when I'm thinking, yeah, as I said earlier, where did that come from? And so, yeah, that's an assumption. That's something that was built into me in something that occurred 40 years ago. And so those
Mm-hmm.
are types of things. We can only be the culmination of our experiences, including our culture, including our lived experience. And so, how do we continue to broaden our lived experience to be more inclusive of people and to understand that there has been a deliberate narrative over history, over time, that persists to dehumanize people, to mark some people as less than? There are many examples of that are horrific in this day and age. And we've got to check that in ourselves. We have to check, where are we holding and regarding people as less than human. And I think we'd be surprised if each of us really sat with ourselves and reflected on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story and being vulnerable. I mean, that's what I'm hoping this podcast is about. If people are interested in getting in touch with you, how can they do that? What's the best way?
Well, I'm almost 62 years old, and this is not necessarily an age thing, because I know many people that are they've got websites and all this. I don't have a website. um, I can provide an email address if that's
If
helpful.
if you want, you don't have to.
Yes, yes. Well,
Or I can have people reach out to me and then I
would
can
be
pass something
fabulous.
on. Okay. Yeah, I can do that. You
I would
can reach out to
that.
me via my website, traumatherapistpodcast.com, and I can send that off to you. Leann, love talking to you. You're welcome back here anytime.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And you're just so friggin' inspiring. Love it.
Yes. Well,
Thank
Guy,
you.
thank you. Appreciate the opportunity and right back at you. I've appreciated the opportunity to connect and to talk. And so thank you.
You're welcome. All right. We'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.